Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMB Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalak.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our 9th episode of season 15, a very special guest and life adversity coach, Marsha Vanwynsberghe. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Marsha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Dan. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe, and I have a whole lot of different things that I do, but it is really focused around teaching people how to share vulnerable stories, find your voice, use it, really remove those limiting beliefs, the blocks, the stories that we all tell ourselves that keep us stuck. And I have walked that journey myself. And I was a parent who dealt with teen substance abuse about 10 years ago. And through that process, I found myself losing my voice. Shame was like swallowing me whole. I was stuck and I did not know how to move forward. And through a lot of work and support, through mentors, counselors, crisis counselors, I found myself in a space of feeling called to share my story. It doesn't make logical sense. A lot of people think like, how could you just do that? Or why would you just do that? I think it's because I felt so incredibly alone and isolated. And I was convinced I was the only person in the world who was struggling with this, which we know is not true. And it's not until you start to share your stories and you start to share that voice that you actually open up and you're able to connect with the people that you're meant to connect with. So that's where the journey really started, from small stages to bigger stages to collaborative books, podcasts. And it has really been a journey of just helping people to learn how to share those stories.
Well, thank you so much for being on this show, especially it being the happiness journey with Dr. Dan. I just want to be able to first help our listeners understand what is life adversity coach. I mean, I know you said about sharing your stories, sharing the struggles that you face, the adversities, but how do you help people see it with your eyes, see it with the same challenges that you face, and especially how to overcome those limiting beliefs that many of us have?
That is such a fantastic question. And I think there's a number of different ways to do it, but it really comes down to we have the story that we're walking through, that we're living, and then we also have the story that we're telling ourselves about what we're living.
Okay.
And that narrative is really what gets us in trouble, because the facts of the story, like I couldn't control what we were walking through, but I could change the narrative about the story about what we were walking through. So that sounds complicated. It's actually quite simple, not easy, but simple. And through that process, like with clients, we will break down what their story is and take a look at all of the pieces that are there. And then it's like, what lessons have you learned because of it? Are you a different person now since you've walked through this? And we all are, right? We're changing and evolving every single day. And so I don't come at it from the standpoint of, finding 100% gratitude in what you've walked through, because I think that doesn't feel like the right message to me, especially when people are walking through trauma. I help them to see, who are you today and how has this shaped you into who you are? And what could you do with this story? Most people who reach out to me are in a space of wanting to see their story differently, wanting to do something, wanting to help that younger version of themselves. And so it's really breaking down what the story is. Then we also get into, with different NLP techniques, looking at like, what are the limiting beliefs that are there? What are the stories that you're telling yourself? And how can we get to the root of what those stories are to create new empowering stories to help you to move forward? And even if a person never gets to a space where they're openly sharing it on podcasts or, in books, you don't have to do that, because so many people are intimidated by that. But the way I often explain it is that if your story is defining you, it is actually holding you back from living the life that you're meant to live, even if you don't ever share it.
Mhm.
So it really becomes a space of what would change in our life if we could start to look at some of those stories differently.
So do you feel that the neurolinguistic programming, especially that you teach others, and the philosophy about stoicism, which is the dichotomy of control, what you can and can't control, do you feel that this is very correlated with neurolinguistic?
I do. And ironically, I didn't learn neurolinguistic till almost 2.5 years ago. So I was the person who put my head down and just pushed through. And I think that those are strengths that only work for so long. And eventually my body was just like, this is just it, I can't do this anymore. And I didn't understand it. During that time, NLP crossed my path. And it really did pique some curiosity for me that it was like, oh, wait, what are the stories I'm telling myself? What are the limiting beliefs that are there? And so when I really started to understand NLP, it helped me to help clients to change the story, and to change the meaning of the story, but also really what we're holding on to in our bodies, that trauma that we're holding on to, you can't just consciously make yourself change it. You have to actually get to the roots of it to change it. So NLP came into my life at a good time. I wish I'd have learned it sooner, but it came into my life at a really a peak time, and it has been incredibly beneficial to learn those pieces and those tools.
So what do you feel like? I know that NLP was created in 1970s by Richard and John. Why do you feel that it is not so prominent in today's psychological world? Why don't they teach NLP as much as they would teach CBT or DBT or any other psychology or psychotherapy? Do you feel that there's something missing in NLP that practitioners are not really pushing too much on it?
That is such a great question. And I guess I'm just going to go with my gut on an answer here. I feel like we are very much a society and a culture that if you work harder, you can create those results. Like you just have to make it happen. Grit is there. You have to do those things. And the more I think the piece that people don't understand, even though I've heard it before and it didn't land, is, our conscious brain is only 5%. And so that is like you can work as hard as you want. But if at the root of it, what we believe to be true, the thoughts we have about ourselves, the beliefs that we have, that's 95% of who we are. So I always equate it and I use example a lot of the iceberg with clients. And it's like, this is what you see. You're spending all this time with the top of the iceberg, and all of this down here, you're not even touching. And so instead of thinking of it, oh my gosh, that's so much more work I have to do. It's not that. It's that if you can learn how to use and utilize your subconscious mind, you actually will achieve your results easier and effortlessly, and actually make the journey so much more, I don't know, so much more easier is what I want to say. There's not anything wrong with this, but I do think we are very much a culture that you can just consciously work hard and make it happen. And if you can't, maybe you don't have the same grit as somebody else. Maybe it's not meant for you. And I don't believe that, but I believe that's what we're being taught.
But through our five neurological senses that we live life and that we observe life, why isn't something that people should, believe in more than just those sciences about psychology, etc.? These are things that we live day in and day out. So this is something that is more practice. But yet, when you tell something that is as logical as those five senses, people feel that no, this is something that is so common among us. So why? How can we change people's mindset to start looking at different alternative options? I'm not saying that NLP is an alternative option to a psychotherapy, but more of start living life at the moment and not just start thinking about what can happen in the future, which will create more fear to people not taking action.
Mm. Wow, that is a big question and a big job that I think that we are being asked to do. I really do. I think the more we are talking about it, maybe it's because it's in my spectrum and I see it now. I certainly see a lot more conversations about subconscious mind, and how I really do, like so much more than I ever did. And I think that it is, having people experience some of the tools and being able to work through that. It is bringing in more practitioners, like opening up some of these tools and training to do it. And really, I think that for the longest time, this was my perception. I came from a number of different companies that I work with. NLP was very much sold as a sales program.
Sure.
And I think that, so when it first came into my spectrum, when I was going through this process, immediately I'm like, that's sales. I don't need sales. I don't know where, but that's what it was presented for the longest time. And that's not how I see it. And now that I understand it at all, I think that changing the narrative as to what it is really important. I think that more and more people speaking about it is important. I think that exposing people to the modalities that are there, they are incredibly powerful and important when it comes to healing and helping us to change that story. So just as a quick example, when I did time techniques and I was the client and we went through some of those processes, we spend so much time thinking that the triggers that we're experiencing every day are the problem, and they're not the problem. It's that the root of it can be buried so deep in us. And when you can actually learn how to shift and change that root, you can actually change the belief. So I think if we could be able to have more conversations like this, then I think it would continue to open up doors of what those tools can do for people.
So then at this point, when you teach others to learn NLP, okay, I mean, obviously this is something that they're going to take with them and teach their clients or patient, whatever it is. Is there a different approach to how what you learn and how you apply it and how you teach it? I mean, there's a transition because obviously those who have no knowledge in psychology or psychotherapy, they will not probably absorb the same way as someone who learned it. So how do you provide that teaching to others?
I think that, and I think you said it perfectly, I think people have to be able to learn it, experience it themselves, apply it, and then take that knowledge even further to be able to see if it's something they want to give with their clients, right? Like, I don't think everybody, I mean, I even think of the people that I've gone through my practitioners and training programs with, they're not all working with clients and they are using those tools maybe on themselves. Maybe they're not using them on themselves. And I think that it also has an impact based on where people are on their journey. How curious are they? I was in a space that I was like, this is just, I cannot continue to do things this way. So what do I have to lose by trying it? And that's how I had a very open mind. Through our journey, I was very open. I did counseling, I did therapy, I did, and I often think about, we're not talking about something that's that long ago. And when I was in an appointment once with a counselor, I had a visceral reaction to something that dropped on the floor.
Okay.
And when they said to me, why did you react that way? And I said, I don't know, it was loud. And they said, no, that's actually, you have PTSD in your system. Like, that's how you responded. And I was like, how do, because I'm thinking that only happens to people who've gone to war. Like, this is just where I was at. And so, but that was the end of the conversation. This is like a trained therapist less than 6 years ago saying, you have PTSD. Okay, so next, and they move on to the next thing. I'm like, what do I do with that? Now there's something else wrong with me. Like, that's what my brain was thinking. That was a prime opportunity if a person was trained, that there are tools that, EFT tapping has been tremendous for me. So it doesn't have to be something that is so incredibly difficult that we aren't sharing that. So I think that that's just a relevant example I wanted to share, that there was a prime opportunity that I could have been exposed to something that I could have done on my own at home, on myself, to help. And it was never even mentioned. So I can't speak in the field when it comes to therapy, but I don't know how prevalent and how maybe open that conversation is, that people are looking at these tools.
So if, let's say, for a therapist that actually is putting into practice NLP, there's a few words that they use with their patients, such as, like, for example, if they know that someone is more focused in auditory or visual
Mhm.
or anything, they will say, I hear what you see, or I see what you mean. So by certain choice of words, they could know. It's like those five love languages from Chapman.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you know exactly that this person is more about words of affirmation. So you focus more on understanding what they want to hear, so you could actually apply it. The same goes with NLP, but again, it's very difficult to be able to understand how can we focus our energy in one of the five neurological senses to be able to take them away from that limiting belief and to put it to detach themselves like you did and start knowing that there's opportunities out there that they can actually grow and prosper from.
I love exactly what you're saying. And that's that rapport piece of being able to build that connection. That my story might have been very different, who knows? But at that time, if I'm very kinesthetic, right? I'm very had, and you could see it viscerally from my reaction. My perception was there was something wrong with me because she said, I can see it in you. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with that? What does that mean? But then that was the end of the conversation. And so, but I'm a very inquisitive person and I wanted to find and learn more, but there's a lot of people that won't. And that then becomes, again, a little bit of a label of this label of I have PTSD, I have anxiety. And they are real. I'm 100% saying this, but we have tools that we could help people to process some of those experiences in their body. And that might change then how they show up, how they respond, how they like interact with others. So I think until I have gone through it, it's taken that for me to understand how valuable these tools are. Even without the tools, I didn't even understand the power of language. I mean, all I said for years was I was stuck. That's all I said was I
Just
felt,
yes. Mhm.
yep, I was stuck. And so I was fascinated, years ago, take him or leave him. Tony Robbins was a big influence for me because he was the person that I learned about state. And here I was living in chaos. So it wasn't like I couldn't go anywhere else. They were minors. And I started to understand what state was. And it's like, oh, if my state is down here, I can't possibly deal with what's happening in my life. So how can I change and affect my state? So, oh, wait, look at the words I'm saying all the time. I'm saying I'm stuck. So I was actually practicing pieces of NLP and incorporating them in my life for years before I ever knew what it was.
Mhm. But do you feel now, it's hard to say, or I'm not sure if it's the same for a lot of people out there, Marsha, but some people are so comfortable in chaos. They're so comfortable in feeling in an environment that is so conducive to negativity, so conducive to being miserable. As you know, misery attracts misery. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't know anything better. So how would you be able to introduce them that life is not just about the negative, about the doomsday, whatever it is, it's something more. But if they have never experienced it, like some people ask me, hey, Dan, you should eat this shrimp. I never ate it. I don't know if it's good or bad. So if I never ate it, might as well not even touch it. But for some people, they're so afraid of the unknown. They're so afraid that there's so much good out there that they could actually explore. So how do you help them detach from this mindset?
These are great questions. One of the things I love to share with people is like our subconscious mind will always gravitate to what's familiar. It'll always gravitate to what is familiar. So even when we're working with a client, it can be like, what is familiar to you? What is something that you experience on a regular basis? And that can also be the examples of, you work towards achieving your goals and you get within that 5% and then you fall backwards again. Has that happened before? And you could see them going, well, yes, that happens all the time because you gravitate towards what is familiar. So then it's like, let's break down what the familiar stories are that you are telling yourself on a regular basis. And then sometimes it's just breaking down, like, is that true? How can we work to say those words in a more empowering way? I use examples that our thoughts are literally only ever replaying the past or creating the future. So which ones are they doing? The more consciously aware somebody can become of the language and the words and the thoughts that they are using on a daily basis, the better chance they have to create change. And so clients will say, wait, do I have to do this like all the time? I'm like, well, do you think all day? Like, do you think, because you've had, 5 decades to be able to like anchor in these beliefs. It is going to take work, but eventually it's the repetition, right? It's that repetition. So I really start to break down, this is what it takes. And then you've got to find ways to really celebrate those wins, because I still have, I think also really clarifying that limiting beliefs, they're not going to go away. You change your reaction with them. I think that's really important, because people think they're doing something wrong if the limiting beliefs go away. And I actually had a podcast guest not that long ago that said that I don't have any anymore. And I'm like, I actually have to call you on that, because I actually do. I'm so sorry, but I do, because if you can say you have absolutely no limiting beliefs come up, I want to know how small is the circle that you're living in, because you're not stretching past that. So my point is that we will keep experiencing those things, but our relationship with them changes. I see those limiting beliefs pop up all the time now. And it's like, oh yeah, I see this. I know how I've navigated. I recognize it. I consciously am aware of it. That's how we can continue to create change.
So what would you say, Marsha, the delay between the positive and negative thought that go through our mind? And we have around 70,000 of them, so it's hard to really monitor each and every one of them. But the thing is that a lot of people say, if I think negative today, okay, will the outcome of my negative thought have impact with the next 6 months from now when I'm going to experience negative outcome, or 3 months, or 1 month, or same for positive? So what is the delay time, would you say, that the thought comes in that is negative? Let's say, oh, I'm not gonna be hired with this job, with this promotion, whatever it is, and it's gonna happen 3 months from now. Because again, thought become things and the laws of attraction. So I've read that somewhere, and I think it was in one of the psychology books, that and it says that it doesn't have really a timeline per se, but think negative today, you will feel the impact in a very short term. And short term is really relative to what you mean short term.
I think that is an incredible question. And I do not know the time, but what I can say is I think you said 70,000 thoughts a day. I believe the last I have seen is like we repeat 80% of them every single day. And of those 80%, something like 85% are negative. It's actually very high. And so when if I can go back to where I said, we look at what are those stories that are on repeat, and then show them that you're repeating 80% of that every day, and 85% of those are negative. So it feels like, oh, great, that's hopeless. Like, what am I going to do now? Right? It's not that. It's just there's conscious awareness. We have to bring the awareness to it to see it. And then I think that as much as you can, if a person is in this space creating change, I often say it's kind of like pushing that snowball uphill. It's a lot of work in the beginning, right? It's a lot of work. It is oh my gosh, I'm just connecting and changing and being aware of my thoughts all the time, constantly. And it can feel like that. It can feel like a tremendous amount of work, especially if you've lived on that negative loop.
Right.
And then in the beginning, when you're first starting that, you can have the one or two things that happen in your day that are maybe negative, or you're catching you off guard, and there goes the snowball, it drops back down again. But with repetition, what I often say is like the things that used to take me out for a week at a time become like a speed bump, and I trip over it. And it's like, oh, so I do think we can compound the negative. And I think that if you choose to stay in that negative spiral every day, I think it can compound for longer than 6 months. Like that's your outlook for your life. And we all know people like that. We do know people like that, unfortunately. And so I think that it can compound negatively. And I also think that you can the more consciously you can be aware of those thoughts in the beginning, especially when you're creating that change, the sooner you're going to be able to compound some positive habits too.
So those self-deprecating thoughts that you have, always saying, well, I'm not good enough for this, I'm not good enough for that, whatever, because we're all somewhat aware of our skills, aware of what we can do. And sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit, or sometimes we give ourselves too much credit. Okay. So where's the balance? Where's the balance to say that, you know what? this is something I can do. So there's no excuses for me to stop moving forward with that. So I'm going to go for it. Or, you know what, this is out of my scope of experience or skills. I better just accept that I'm not going to go and fly to the moon with just a rocket that I cannot even build. Right. So where does it go? To what extent?
I think that majority of people, this is a generalization, I think majority of people don't celebrate their strengths. They don't see their strengths. They don't see what they're capable of. I think that you have a certain percentage of people that maybe are overinflated with what they see. And so we're not going to talk about that now. The people that don't see what it is, I think the average people don't recognize what their strengths are. So sometimes as we look at those limiting beliefs, we look at those stories, it's like, what are your strengths? And most people don't have a clue. Most people don't have a clue. And so sometimes it's like, who can we ask? Who can we connect with? Because we all have them. Like, we all have some strengths. We all have some gifts that we can use, that we can tap into, and we're not meant to know it all. We're not meant to do it all. That's not it. It's okay to stay in your path. So I think it's a dance, but I think that more people could make better progress if they can start to see what their strengths are and honor that. And I don't think that that is like an egotistical way of doing it. I think it's important because I don't think the average person has a clue what their strengths are. And I think that we actually should tap into that a little bit more.
So how can people find you if, let's say, they're looking to get trained in NLP? And I'm sure that a lot of people, after listening to this podcast, they can find the benefits of understanding NLP. So what is your website? How does it work? How many students do you take per each group, and so on and so forth?
I've made it very easy. I have a very long last name, as you heard in the beginning. So everything on social media is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. That's my website. That's everything. So you can find me there. You can find me on Google through that as well. And my podcast is called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. So very active there and share a lot of content there. And with my certification, we're really just starting. And what I've done, the one thing about NLP is you can create your certification however you want. But I have leaned mine towards the phrase outspoken, because I really want to help people to find their voice. That's the number one thing people keep coming to me for, is how do I share that voice? How do I put that story together? And so it is, we've set it up as a 6-month container, because I know that you can take a NLP certification in a week, you can do all kinds of things, but I like this 6-month container because I want them to walk away with being able to learn how to integrate it into their business as well. So that's the piece that we do. And we're just kicking our first cohort off at the end of May.
Beautiful. And what would be the 3, I would say, giveaway that you could tell our listeners before we end this podcast, in terms of, how should they handle those limiting beliefs that they have, and what can they put into practice immediately?
Okay, so let me just go off my gut here. First one, don't believe every thought that you have, because I actually don't believe most of the thoughts you have unless you are consciously being aware of it. The story only ever has the meaning that you give it. I use that one all day long, all the time, because we are a product of the experiences that we're walking through, and we can't always control what's happening to us, but we can control how we respond and how we take care of ourselves to be able to respond. And third one I'm going to say is that your story will take you places and connect you with people that you can't see yet. So limiting beliefs being part of it, the fear of judgment and criticism from other people is another big piece. Do not block yourself from showing up and sharing your story based on the people who are in your life today, because that's actually not who it's for. You're actually meant to help people you haven't met yet, who are looking for solutions you're holding on to. Majority of my inner circle and people I work with now, I didn't know 5 years ago. And so you're allowed to continue to evolve and grow, but don't let the people in your life today be the reason why you do or do not move forward, because they could also be the environment that is feeding those limiting beliefs at the same time. I love you, but I have to say that.
That is so true. Thank you so much. Well, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time of your busy schedule, Marsha, to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and skills. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode. I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 15 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Life is unpredictable, and it's not uncommon to face adversity along the way. However, how we choose to deal with these challenges is what sets us apart. Instead of letting adversity defeat us, we can choose to see it as an opportunity to grow and learn. Now remember, challenges and setbacks are not the end of the road. They are simply a detour that can lead us to unexpected places and new opportunities. The best way to deal with life adversity is to approach it with a positive mindset, embrace the lesson it teaches us, and use it as a motivation to become stronger and wiser. Now, don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. You don't have to face adversity alone. Seek support from friends, family, or professionals who can offer guidance and perspective. Remember, there's no shame in asking for help. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalek, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.